So for those of you who don't know me, that's the bit I was going to start with. My name is Sian Robertson, and I can't find my page in the book. So the first thing I want to do is some thank yous. Oh, I know I'm going to cry. It's just, I'm so tired, and this has been, this has been the most profound experience, certainly of my art career, if not my life. So, but anyway, here we go. All right. So first of all, Alice Gong and Cecilia and all the 20 Summers people who just gave me this amazing opportunity. I reached out to Alice and said, hey, I'd love to do something at the barn. And she's like, oh yeah, I love your work. Sure, I'll come to your studio on Thursday. And then she's like, what would you want to do? What would you do if you were going to do something that you don't usually do? And I said how I cut up the maps, I make them very fragile, then I protect them between pieces of acrylic or in boxes or books. And what I wanted to do was still cut up the maps, still make them really fragile, but not protect them, have them be hanging down, hundreds of maps hanging from the ceiling. That's as much as my concept went. And she said, yeah, love it, great, let's do it. May 20th, that'll be your install day. And I was like, oh my God, I'm doing it. And here we are, and it's kind of crazy that she just gave me this big opportunity on what felt like such a whim, really. And she just let me do it, whatever I wanted to do. Except it's a historical building and you're not allowed to even put a push pin in it. So there's a lot of technical challenges to it, which come to my thanks for Tim and David and Meg, who installed it with me on Monday for hours and hours and hours. And it was a challenge. We hung things from the beams, which are so high up. Tim was up this highest ladder I've ever seen. We were all worried he was going to fall off, but he didn't. And so that was incredibly helpful to me to have this team of people. It's been I don't usually let people help me at all. I just want to do my thing and then give it to wherever it's going. So it's been a really interesting process to do something like that and need other people and other people's ideas, not just showing up to help install it, but I had David and Tim over to my house and I'm like, I've got hundreds of these. What are we going to do? Help me. And, this trellis idea came from that conversation and it worked perfectly. And he's not here because he's sick, but my husband, Nick, is the best. So he always cheers me on. So I'm sad he's not here. But so this is called Impermanence. And like I said, I wanted to explore that fragility and how things would be impermanent and it's okay, and things move and change and decay, and sometimes that's a good thing. And that was sort of my theoretical sort of inspiration for it all. My sort of literal inspiration was the window, because I looked at many, many, many pictures of the barn and videos of the barn, because you couldn't get in because it was closed at that point. So so the window, every picture you look at, it's like it's the window, it's the window, it's the window. And the window is it feels like it's 95% of the barn is the window. So that was my main inspiration for what I was going to do. And then I went through many iterations of things that fell apart way too quickly. And there's the concept of impermanence, and then you don't want it falling apart before you've arrived. So that seemed. So I rejected many things. And then I kept coming back to the window, kept coming back to it, and I felt that this, I always knew it's going to be maps. Obviously it's going to be maps because that's what I do, and obviously I'm going to cut them because that's what I do. But then exactly what? And I thought of many different maps. Shall I have them all be different? Shall I have them all be the same? And I don't know if you guys know Bob Rindler, but he has this thing that he said once that has stuck with me forever, which is that 1 is an object, 2 is a pair, 3 is a collection, and 100 is a work of art. And I think that is so true. You repeat something 100 times, and it has a sort of a power in the repetition, maybe they're all exactly the same. In my things, they're They're not exactly the same. They're the same map, but they're different because they're cut differently. And I think that there's a sort of beauty in the repetition that I really like. There's about 875, or it's not quite 900. I'm not sure exactly how many there are. I'm ashamed to say, but I don't know exactly how many. So maybe 875, give or take, is an installation. I'm not sure. So one of the reasons I called it, well, one of the things that spoke to me of impermanence is the world feels very impermanent. I'm sure every generation feels the world's very impermanent. I'm sure people who were, whatever ages each of us are, during like World War II or something, I'm sure they felt the world was very impermanent. But once again, it's very impermanent. There's wars, there's famines, there's climate change, there's rising tides, there's, borders are changing, and people are being forced to migrate to get to places that you can actually live in. So I don't make art to specifically express things like that, but I spent hours listening to NPR while I'm cutting these things up, and I feel like it's inside it, and so it's interesting to me. I feel like this means something more than most of the work I've ever made. I'm really not interested in the actual geography of a place, usually. I'm much more interested in the colours and the shapes and the lines. So what am I going to do with this? If I've got this thing, they're all going to be the same but different. So, what am I going to do? So I reach to the London A to Z, which is always my favourite map ever, and the number of art breakthroughs I've had with this map is amazing. So I partly chose it because I felt like the pages echoed the window panes, and then I had this idea of threading them together, and it feels like the different strips of the windows. But there's also, and it's aesthetically beautiful. I love the colours of this map. This is, they're sort of soft and creamy, and they're sort of lovely colours. And then you have these blue, the Thames and the motorways, and then the green parks are great. And then the roads are, well, some of them are white. They're boring, but but there's all these yellow and orange roads, and I don't know if any of you know this, but they're called oranges and lemons, those two roads. And back in the day before GPS, the taxi cab drivers in London had to pass the knowledge. It was a test, and yet they had to know all the oranges and lemons, and that's a little tidbit of history for you. But I also lived in London for about a year and a half in the very early 90s. So it also has that. Like, this was before GPS, and we were all carrying cell phones. And I didn't leave the house without this thing. Like, how would you know where you're going? And I just loved, I would mostly take the bus because it's more interesting to see than the underground, unless you're going far and you need to be there fast. So I would always be like following along in the London A to Z. So it has a sort of personal attachment too, which mostly they don't when I'm using them in my work. So people always want to know like where I've got them, and so I always use used maps, because they come with the inherent history of the person that used it before me, which I often don't know. Sometimes there's interesting little notes inside them, but or sometimes I know the person who gave it to me, and they say, this was my grandfather's, we were clearing out the attic, something like that. But mostly I don't know. And so all of these were bought on eBay. Some of them did have interesting little notes. There's one on this bit right here. Somebody drew something on there. So I'm not going to cut that piece out because that's interesting. It's sort of extra, an extra bonus piece. I've lost my train of thought now. So there are 13 copies of the London A to Z in the installation. And like I said, I don't know exactly how many pages it is, but it's about 875, give or take. I think what I want to say about it too is that this has been like such a different thing for me to do. It's really like the size of it and the scale of it, but the repetition of it again and again and again of the same things and cutting the spaces out. I basically cut the spaces out between, I'd see a shape when I look at the page, I'd see a shape and I would cut the space out, or I'd cut like the park away or a lake or a river or something like that, and then save them all because they need to go underneath. So each one is different, and they're not as lacy as the other work that I usually do where I cut all the spaces out. So that was kind of interesting. Sometimes I'd sort of get a bit carried away and sort of do too many, and then sometimes I'd be like, oh, bored of this big giant one, just need to move on, dinner's ready or something. And then I thread them all together with the red thread, which I chose because it's not in the map. There's, I think it's 5 different editions of the A to Z that I've used here, and they're all slightly different colors because they're different editions and some are older. They range from 1995 to, I think it's 2015. So I didn't want any color that was in the map because that's not going to be, it's not going to be accurate across the different editions. So it had to be something that was completely different, and I liked the idea of the red being sort of like blood and veins and sort of connections to people and the sort of humanity. So, and I just thought it looked cool with the colors of the maps is, you know, another perfectly valid reason to choose it. So I thread them all on and then hung them onto the trellis, and they were all sort of folded up like this with paper clips to hold them together when we installed it, which was quite a feat to get the things above the beams. So that's sort of like the practical thing about it. But it's so interesting to me to have been like immersed in this for, you know, months, and really actively doing it like almost every day for like 2 months. And then figuring out all the tech side of it and how to do it. And then seeing it is just, like, I just don't know how you envision, like, I don't know how you know what it's going to look like when you do something like this. Like, it looks not like anything I really imagined. I mean, it looks way better than I imagined. I'm super happy with it. When we installed it, and I went up the ladder. It was the only time I went up the ladder. And I took the paper clips off, and the thing started cascading down. And the 3 people who were helping me all stood there, and they suddenly beamed. And I knew it was going to be okay, and I knew it was going to look good. And then since I've been here, it's so profound being in this space. 20 Summers has a video on their website that talks about the history of the barn and all these people who've come through here, cultural people, artists, talkers, thinkers, writers, musicians, all kinds of people. And it's amazing to be one of them. So I think that's really all I have to say, and I would love to hear what you have to say about it and what your questions are, and anything that you want to know. Thank you.